Shalom and welcome to another episode in our series called Picture This from Israel. Today we're visiting Chorazin, which is primarily a 3rd century city, AD, but there was certainly a city here in the days of Jesus, and we're going to try to not only imagine what it would have been like to live here, but we're also going to hear the words of Jesus as spoken against the religious leaders and the Pharisees of the day. I wonder what it would have felt like to be on the receiving end of condemning words. This is indeed what the residents of this site heard from Jesus. They were condemned because of their unbelief. The site is a site that has primarily 3rd century AD ruins, Corazim. The stones are basaltic, indigenous to this area. We're heading to the synagogue just to see what we can notice about this 3rd century synagogue, but they did excavate during the COVID season down to the 1st century level. Here it is, the synagogue. And we'll take a peek inside and then make some connections with trying to picture Jesus here and sharing rather harsh words about those who lived here, as well as in Bethsaida and Capernaum. Let's take a peek inside the synagogue. So when we walk up these steps, I should say, into the synagogue, you can see it's reconstructed. And this synagogue is one that's done typically in the same size and format as most 1st century synagogues, although it is a 3rd century structure. We're walking around the edge of this synagogue, still standing, although reconstructed are these pillars. The people here at Corazim in the 3rd century actually continued the building and the use of this synagogue as we take a look at the structure from this particular angle. One very unique discovery, in fact the real one is displayed in the museum, is what is called the Moses seat. In fact, there it is behind me. The Moses seat is actually referenced in Matthew chapter 23. In fact, that's a chapter where Jesus condemns the religious leaders for teaching and believing one thing and yet not doing what they taught. In other words, they didn't practice what they preached. It talks about the Moses seat, those who sit in the most important seat of the synagogue. Well, this was certainly one of these seats, and again, 3rd century, but nonetheless, this was discovered here, I think way back in the 1930s or 40s. But Jesus condemned the religious leaders especially. Woe to you, Pharisees and teachers of the law. Essentially saying you teach one thing and you don't even carry it out in your own personal life. I picture and can imagine Jesus saying this very harshly to those religious leaders, not only here in Corazim and Capernaum and Bethsaida, these 3 cities that were condemned, but probably to other religious leaders around the country and even in Jerusalem. This Moses seat has an Aramaic inscription. It's basically in honor of the person who dedicated work or even resources to build this synagogue. Again, the real one is displayed in the Israel Museum. Now, as we picture Jesus being here, and no doubt he was, we can picture these structures, now, of course, rebuilt for us, spreading out on this hillside. In fact, if you look across the road today, all of that would have been part of this town of Corazim. Actually, the spring of the city was located on the other side of the road today. Let's take a look at an oil press before we bring this to a close. But taking a look around us, we can see the topography of this area. Corazim is located on a hill and away from the water of the Galilee, the Sea of Galilee. In another video, we will actually invite you to walk with us on a very new trail that connects Corazim with Capernaum. It's down towards the lake. Capernaum's right on the shoreline, but that's the trail that we are going to use to make our walk. So stay tuned and look for a video that captures that 2.5 mile hike. Corazim, built on these hills up above the Sea of Galilee. Before we read Matthew 23, in the context of Corazim, here's a good example of an olive press. Olives would have been collected and then placed on this stone with that rounded stone, crushing the olives, most likely moved by an animal just because of its sheer weight. And then the second step in the process was to take what was crushed, be put in a basket, and then with a counterweight, the oil would be extracted in that way. In fact, this probably is the stone upon which the basket of crushed olives would be placed, and then you can see that channel would have captured the oil as it would have been extracting from the crushed olives. The oil press here at Corazim. So as we bring this video to an end, I want us to hear the words from Matthew 23. These are condemning words that Jesus shares with the Pharisees and the religious leaders of his day. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat." We just saw that. "So you must be careful to do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Everything they do is done for people to see. They make their phylacteries wide and their tassels on their garments long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seat in the synagogue. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to be called rabbi by others. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth Father, for you have one Father who is in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant, and those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Woe to you, teachers of the law and the Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea to win a single convert, but when you have succeeded, you make them twice as much a child of hell as you are. Woe to you, blind guides! You get the idea. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees! You give a tenth of your spices, but you neglect the more important things of the law. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! He says that a few times. You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full with greed and self-indulgence. And one more. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but are on the inside, and are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. Actually, one more. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees! You build tombs for the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous. And you say, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. So you testify against yourselves that you are the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell? These are tough words that Jesus would share, and it would go on, of course, a few more verses, but you get the idea. And certainly this city in Corazim, we're up north here, along and above the Sea of Galilee, but these Pharisees and teachers here also did not accept Jesus, what he was doing. They did not accept him as the Messiah, and they would be condemned for that. Corazim, Capernaum, and Bethsaida would all be condemned by Jesus. So we can picture Jesus saying these harsh words here in a city located high above the Sea of Galilee. Thanks for walking around with me, seeing a few things here at this essentially 3rd century city, although there was a 1st century city called Corazim here, and we have seen at least the highlights of it. Until next time, Shalom.